Good evening, it's 5 o'clock, and I'm going to call the special meeting to order. Just a couple of housekeeping items. Dr. Jewel Harmon, our Chief Accountability Officer, will be attending the meeting via Zoom. And now I'd like to call a roll call on 1.03. First of all, Vice President Minow.
Present.
Director Farrell.
Present.
Director Margell.
Present.
Director Clark.
Present.
All right, and I'd like to, now we're on to 1.04. Director Margell, are you ready to do the pledge?
I am.
Would
Yes.
you join us, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome again. This is a meeting of the Kent School District Board, which is held in public to comply with the Open Public Meeting Act. We thank those of you who have come to the meeting and those who are viewing on live stream. And now it's to 1.06, land acknowledgement. Vice President Bennett.
Thank you. We acknowledge we are gathered upon the ancestral lands of the Muckleshoot Indian tribe who historically lived throughout the area between the Cascade Mountains and Puget Sound.
All right, we're on to 2.0. And 2.01, American Federation of Teachers Union of Washington, Kent Chapter, AFT contract. I will entertain a motion.
Move approval of 201 American Federation of Teachers Union of Washington, Kent Chapter, AFT contract.
Second.
Discussion.
I had a couple of questions, if that's okay.
Sure.
My first question is, do we know the percentage of ratification for this contract?
I have Ms. Christine Benedetti here that can answer the questions for that.
Yes.
So if you want to come to the podium?
Good evening. It was 80% for.
And then my other question, I noticed we had the final copy of the contract in our materials, but I didn't see the edited. I liked seeing that with the KEA contract, but I didn't get to see it with that. Is it possible for me to get a copy of that and see? I just want to see what the differences were in the contract.
Yes.
Thank you.
Further discussion. Director Clark, you're leaning forward like you have something to say.
No, I mean, it's always pleasant to come to a solution that clearly addresses the issues for both sides, and it's wonderful to get back to normalcy.
Any other further discussion? Well, I'd just like to say that, again, I want to thank both sides that came together on all these conversations and discussions, and we found a way to make it work. We had a little stormy start out there, and I honestly hope in the future that we can find a way to do our bargaining in a little bit more gentle way, so we're all not facing such a degree of animosity toward one another. And in any district, no matter where we are, what we're doing, we're all in this for the right reasons. And we all can find our differences in how we approach this, or amounts that we needed, or time that's needed, or programs that needed. But we have to keep in the format that our kids are central to all of this, and that our staff and employees are central to all this. And I'd like to recognize Mr. Hunter.
Yes, thank you, President Amata, members of the board. We are in the process of hitting reset. Again, I want to give a hand to Christine, Director Vendetti, because she was critical in getting the agreement with AFT and with some of our other classified labor partners. But we are in the process of hitting reset. We've already, in terms of meeting with KEA, with, through our labor management meetings. We've discussed going through joint training with, geez, I'm losing my train of thought, but the joint training with the interest-based bargaining, geez.
Yes.
So we've discussed that just the other day. There is an interest there, right? So I'm confident that we're going to be moving forward with the relationship, but not just KEA, but with all of our labor partners. So yeah, more to come on that in terms of the reset of the relationship.
And I would be interested if you do that to have the board be invited to see the training as well, if that's possible as well.
Yeah.
I don't know if it is.
Definitely.
Thank you very much for stepping forward, I appreciate that, and I think we're headed in a very good direction, and I'm extremely pleased to have Mr. Hunter with us. I've seen lots of good signs already of things that seem to be working out pretty well. We're in a beginning stage, but we're gonna continue that, and interest-based bargaining has been an interest of mine and other board members for quite some time. Unfortunately, you know, we've been through a lot of changes here, and we just didn't get on top of it fast enough to make it work, but that doesn't mean we can't do it now, and that we can't go forward. And again, with this contract being 80% approved, obviously their union wants to accept most of this. The only thing I have in question is sometimes reading through the entire contract, and talking about being paid more if there's not people in the room or stuff like that. It all sounds wonderful, but one of the things we all know is we need all those supports in our building. We have to just do everything we can to bring back those supports and have them there, and not just accept a teacher that's gonna take more responsibility, because not only does it take more responsibility and time consuming, it takes from that person that's giving out maybe 120% or 150%, when really 100% is pretty good. It drains them, and it doesn't help them in the long run. It doesn't help our staff, and it burns out some teachers, quite frankly, so we don't want that either. So those are just some of my general comments, but I'm glad that we're here, and I think that concludes all my remarks. But again, thank you to everybody that was on that committee, the bargaining, all the hours that went into that and what's going forward, and all of our union partners that stepped in at the table and found a way to make it work. So is there any further discussion? Anybody else? All right. It has been moved and seconded for the acceptance of American Federation of Teachers Union of Washington Kent Chapter AFT contract. All those in favor signify by raising your right hand and saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed signify by raising your right hand and saying nay. Abstentions, the motion carries. All right. All right, and it looks like we are at 5:08, and we are adjourned from the special meeting, is that correct?
Yes.
And then we'll be back at 8:10 for our work session. Stay tuned. Oh, 5:10, excuse me. It sounded good.
See, I tried to add.
I don't see that though. I only see my edits.
Oh. That was a quick 2 minutes. All of a sudden it's 5:10. Alrighty, it is 5:10 again, and I'm calling the work session to order. And I'd like to now call on Superintendent Bell for introductions.
Thank you, President Mott. I am proud to present to you Ms. Pam Holly, our policy coordinator, who We'll be kicking off our policy work sessions, your first one for the year. We spent some time preparing to this point, and as you recall from a previous policy information for you, we're finishing up many of the things that we left off with last year, first of all, before we hit the ground running with all the rest of our policy. So I'll introduce Ms. Pam. Holly, come on.
Good evening, President Hamada, members of the board, Superintendent Vela, and I'm not sure if Ms. Santillo's on, but if so, hello. Tonight I want to talk to you about the policies that you agreed should move forward that had been worked on in the spring. And we can hopefully get some of those wrapped up and move forward to working on the essential policies, but we'll just jump on in. Just a refresher of the different categories of policies, and we have essential, encouraged, and discretionary. One tonight is essential, the rest are discretionary that we're working on. Again, policies the board's charge, and procedures the staff's charge. So the board sets the policy, the staff works on the procedure to match the policy. And I just want to ask, is getting in the folders okay? Are you able to, I know we talked to a couple people today that having a little bit of issue. Yes, Director Clark?
I had an issue.
Okay.
So,
We can anytime work on it, whenever you'd like. If you'd like to come in, I'm happy to go through it. So if there are any problems, we want to make this as easy as possible. And note your changes if we can. If not, we'll just do it this way here tonight. So whatever works easiest for you guys. We're gonna start off with policy 6700, nutrition, health, and physical education. This is our second reading. Although the first reading took place June 1st with some of you on the board, the policy was updated in the middle of June by WASDA. So what they did basically was cleaned it up a little bit to not make so much procedural information available in the policy. They included a lot of procedure, and it should have been policy, and I think they recognize that. So let me get to that. We'll open up and look at it together.
I actually liked it because it's more cleaner than how it
Yes,
was.
and I knew what you were talking about when you
Right.
sent your information in today, so we'll look at it that way. Okay, so we're gonna start with 6700. I did a comparison of the changes. Unfortunately, those comparisons do not show on this computer. I do not know why, but we'll look at them together of what was on there before. Here's the one from the beginning of June, and as you can see, it had a ton of procedural information in it. We're gonna go back and look at the update that's been done. And if we scroll through, you'll be able to see that they cleaned it up. They talk about a wellness policy. You can see that they took out a ton of the procedural information. We talk about the health and physical education portion, and I didn't see any notes from anyone in the folders about this policy.
Only one, yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I had notes, I successfully saved them, it said, but
Okay.
they went away again apparently.
Okay,
So, who
we'll
knows
work,
what
we'll
I'm
work
doing.
on that together. And if you said you were gonna bring your handwritten notes
I
in, we
did.
can make
Yeah.
whatever changes the board is suggesting.
Well, actually, I did a little research, which is, it's not so much in changing, but, I had the time to really, kind of delve into some stuff with some other people who are experts on this. And the problem, I mean, these are just kind of comments, I guess is what I'm gonna go on with this. Yes, we are following all kinds of federal guidelines on nutrition and everything. It looks like that in our lunches and everything else that we're doing all this that's been set up. But so many of the real nutritionists, when they've studied all these federal guidelines, are not totally agreeing that the national standards are the best, because they give such a small quantity of what is in it to make it broad to everybody across the United States, that actual nutrition is not one of the key factors in all this. So, I mean, I'd like to see something go beyond in our district about doing a little bit more research on nutrition and actually maybe bringing in a lot more fresh foods and things like that. If we in our district could incorporate that. A couple, three things are a factor, it appears, in most people well-being, and we talk a lot about social and emotional learning. And done some reading on that, and it's getting enough sleep, getting proper food, and getting proper exercise. And all of that, whether you believe it or not, has an impact on how kids perform, or adults, or anybody with mental health problems, or with autism, or just overall stress problems. And I mean, I've kind of looked at these policies and gone through and cleaned them up, but now I'm going to a deeper level and thinking that I'd like to see in this district, if we can, even go beyond that, to start some investigation, and maybe some of our strategic planning or some other in-depth stuff. This covers the policies, but I think we need to go a deeper layer.
So, President Hamad, if I may answer something about, you started about nutrition. We are getting reimbursement from USDA for following their guidelines.
Right.
And I think that plays a major role in how we provide our food to students. So, and I know Teresa Fields, the Director of Nutrition Services, is great about bringing in a ton of local fresh produce. I think she even mentioned at her presentation about the different fruits, the oddball things. But I don't know if Mr. Rarick or Dr. Harmon would like to jump in about the nutrition portion of it, but I do believe because it's federally reimbursable, we have to follow the USDA guidelines.
No, of course, I'm just saying, and this is just for a general discussion, I'd like to see us go further. And that's probably not in a policy work session, but I wanted to bring that out here.
I do recall Ms. Fields did share with us that she does do research on what other entities bring in fresh fruit. In fact, she presented that in her presentation. That is something that she continues to do and to look for. So we are doing that, but we'll continue to do that.
I'd like to even take it on a deeper level, maybe to have, again, maybe in a strategic planning committee, separate thing about nutrition, separate about wellness and all that. So my comments are, in general, the policy is okay. But again, I'd like to see us take a deeper dive at that. I'd like to take a deeper dive at the development of curriculum on health and fitness, and perhaps even in our procedures, and this is just going beyond again, is I'd like to see us doing more in physical fitness. And again, following some of the research that John Ratty has on all the social and emotional learning goes back to those three things: proper nutrition, proper diet, and proper exercise. And I mean, I think we've gotten away in our society where we're getting away from that, and I don't think it's good for our kids, and I don't see why we can't, in our social emotional learning, be investigating and having a committee that works toward more inclusion of that in our classes. And not only for our kids, but for our professional staff. Because if you go down to Silicon Valley, all their people are like, they don't let their kids have cell phones. They don't let the kids have this stuff because they want their kids to be productive and have a lot of brain power. So they're taking this stuff away from them. Yet we're putting them on computers more and more and more and not getting that kind of exercise that's needed. But those are just some of the things that are going beyond that with me. And again, in our particular school district, I put in green in here, that I've been to some elementary schools, and it says that in this policy that scheduling resource before lunch for elementary students. Well, usually a lot of the schools I went to, the lunch was before recess, so are we following that policy?
Well, it talks about having it be adjacent, I believe is how the KEA contract reads, having recess be adjacent, whether it's before or after the lunch period. And recess has been moved from 10 minutes to 15 minutes now, so it's adjacent either before or after. But I don't know that I don't believe it is required to be before. There's a lot of research that says it should be, but at this point in time, our KEA contract says adjacent to.
Right, but this policy actually has it written in it, so we have to change that.
That it's,
It's in green, I've got it highlighted. It's in the first paragraph, toward the last part of it, it says, "The board recognizes the benefit of scheduling at least 20 minutes of seat time for lunch for every student and scheduling resource before lunch for elementary students."
well, I believe, you know, it's, the boards recognize the benefit of it, but it doesn't, it's not always gonna happen that way.
Okay,
Not that it's required, but, you know, if it can be, they'd like it, we'd like it to be, the board would prefer it to be that way, but it may not be able to be given scheduling concerns.
okay. I mean, I can accept that. I just wondered if maybe that there needs to be a word added. I mean, it says it recognizes the benefit. Okay. I guess it's interpretation. All right. I'll let it alone.
I have
Anyone
a couple
else?
comments. In there it talks about, instructors possessing a valid health and fitness endorsement. I don't think they call it fitness endorsement anymore. I mean, I was on the health and PE committee, so I'm curious if, when I did the standards revision committee, I was on the OSPI committee, and I think they changed it out to physical education. So I would just comment, I'm just checking that. The other thing I noticed, we go between PE and physical education throughout the document. I know this is from WASDA. I think we should be consistent, either say PE or physical education throughout. As a whole, I'm against waivers in PE, but that's neither here nor there, but I'm just putting that out there. And also, I'm noticing, I know we have a policy about sexual education in health class, but I noticed that's not even mentioned in here. I'm assuming that's because it's in a different policy?
I am gonna have to defer to maybe Dr. Corley.
Yeah, we have Christine Corbett here that can answer that question, but I wanna make sure that we, document your first one, being consistent with language that's aligned with the standards that have been approved.
Yeah.
And definitely we'll do that.
Thank you.
President of Model Board of Directors, Superintendent Vega. Yes, it is a separate policy. There's this weird little caveat in this particular policy around health and fitness, but there is another policy that deals with our sexual education and HIV.
Can we put that into cross-references so that if someone looks at the policies, they can see that? That would be awesome. Thank you.
And Director or Vice President Bento, the term is highly qualified. I believe is what my daughter says. They're using highly qualified in any field, because they did have it highly qualified, and then they took it away for COVID, and now they put it back in the WAC or whatever, it's highly qualified in there.
Again, my team will look into the standardization of the language to make sure we're consistent.
I mean, it's been a minute since I've been on committee since
Yeah.
COVID, but yeah, I appreciate that.
Any other comments?
Yeah, I just wanted to, how do we determine the 20 minutes scheduling for?
Is that done by principals at the building for a lunchtime schedule?
What exactly is that?
It's the lunch, like it says
Seat
20
time.
minutes seat time. How do we determine that? I'm just curious.
So seat time for lunch.
For lunch.
For lunch.
Yeah.
So we have a scheduled lunch period.
Okay.
Right, so how you would determine it is to provide for it. Sometimes students want to leave sooner than normal, so you have to make sure that they're scheduled at that time. I know in our visits, we've actually gone to lunchrooms.
Right.
Where we've seen students, they're scheduled for that time, but they cannot, they have to be.
Because they were not sitting 20 minutes, I know that. They were.
The school will do different kinds of things for
Okay.
activities, but they do need the time to be able to sit and eat.
Okay. So that is
Schedule.
according to scheduling
Yes.
for the day. So it can be short or it can be, because it will affect the rest of the.
It is scheduled for lunch.
Okay.
Recess will be scheduled outside of that.
Right. So, but what I'm saying is that is during the day, you know, so many hours of instructions that they have to have.
So that's why it's important for the board to know, we first must have the time for the amount of minutes for instruction.
Right.
That's why schedules are so critical here,
Right.
and the minutes are so critical to make sure that we provide a schedule.
Right.
that meets those qualifications, and the 20 minutes are scheduled within that time. Recess is outside of that.
Just to follow up with that, is it a study done to determine that 20 minutes? Or, I mean, I'm just curious, what if we say 15 minutes or 25 minutes?
So the question whether a study was done.
Right.
I'm not aware of a study that was done.
Okay.
I do know that we have scheduled lunches that offer the ample time for lunch to be had by students for that time.
But I just wanna know the 20 minutes, the number itself. If I'm making, you know what I mean, like that number, 20 minutes, how did it come about?
And so I think I'll defer to Mr. Randy Heath to be able to either get you an answer or find an answer for it.
Good evening, President Hamada, members of the board, Superintendent Vela. So I think what you're asking is, well, maybe I want to clarify. So are you saying, how did WASDA come up with the recommendation of 20 minutes for lunch?
Right. What is the determination of saying, well, let's give the kids 20 minutes of seat time to eat lunch?
Right.
Why is it 20? Why couldn't it be 10, 15, 25, however other?
Yeah, I think they're trying to set a minimum of what it could be, and then each school, you see, what's tough is that depending on how many number of students are in a school, how many do you have a lunchroom? How big is your lunchroom? How many lunches are you circling through? How many recesses do you need to try to schedule? That all helps determine how much time you can get. So you will see a little bit of variation at our elementary schools around the amount of time that is set aside there. I think the really clarifying the seat time thing is important because if you didn't, then the transition to lunch and the transitions to get there and away from lunch could be counted in there. And so I think what they're saying is putting it can't be less than 20 minutes because we don't think any amount of kids can eat in less than 20 minutes, but it doesn't say anything about making it longer if you're able to.
Yeah.
If I may, I can forward you a study. I think it comes from the CDC, did a healthy lunch program, and I think it came from 2010. I can forward it to you all because I have it somewhere. I did it on the committee. So like, it's something. So I think I'm guessing WASDA based it off that study from the CDC. So I can find that.
Yeah, mine was, we didn't do a study.
Yes.
What we do is set the amount of time needed so students can eat lunch appropriately, because like I said, some students, if we don't provide the ample time, they'll leave very quickly to get outside, and we want them to have the time to eat lunch.
Thank you. I'm sorry if, I didn't want to cause any more.
No.
I just wanted to make sure that, we knew. The other thing I wanted to add is to follow up with President Hamada's comment about nutrition. One of the bullets is that accommodating children with special dietary needs. And I wanted to add culturally appropriate food, if we can, to make sure that all students have the ability to have a nutrition for them, something to that effect, if we can,
And I would need to check with Director Fields about, I don't know, supply, that type of thing, or what the percentage is that we need at different buildings. And again, based on USDA reimbursement, do certain things qualify for that? But definitely we can check on that.
In last time she was here, we talked about this, and she said that she's done the research and knows where to get it from. So I just wanted to have that in writing in the policy so that
I agree.
we are making, I mean, it's one thing to say it, but it's another thing to make it a policy so that we have it in writing.
Okay, we'll add that part in as well.
Right, in any culture, they're gonna have nutrition choices available that they can choose from that FDA is gonna approve if they're.
That's it.
So another thing I wanted to bring up is the last time, and Director Margell was not here when we went over this policy before, but there was a lot of talk about recess and the withholding of recess. And so I know that the board had talked about withholding it only for certain things, for remediation, for catching up on work. And I believe that Mr. Heath wanted to talk about that with you for a few moments.
Great, thank you again. So there is some confusion with the wording of this policy list, and it really is, these are the recommendations. Ideally, that would happen. It is not a prohibition of using recess as a form of discipline. So it's important that there was some suggestion, well, maybe we should put some language in there that makes it more clear. And I would caution that that should not happen in this policy of 6700, which really deals with an overall nutrition wellness. It's fine to mention that that is something that everybody should strive for. However, if we as a district want to consider and that discipline should, that recess should not be used for discipline any reason, there's a more appropriate place that should be considered, and that's in our 3000 series that has to do with students, in our actual policy and procedure that has to do with student discipline. Because the danger of starting to put in language in policies that are kind of out of their normal area is down the line as we move along. That's not where people will be going to look in terms of, you know, it's like I've heard that you can't use recess for disciplinary reasons. And they wouldn't think to go looking in the 6700 series, they'd be looking under our discipline policy and procedure. And 10 years from now, if there's a whole bunch of new people sitting in all of these chairs around here, they're not going to remember that there was something in the nutrition policy, the things around nutrition. We have a district committee that is made up of staff and community members that each year looks at disciplinary policy and procedures and recommends changes if necessary. I would argue that that's the place that something like that should be looked at, because we already have a system that's set into place. So I think that the language about striving toward that is fine in this policy, but we shouldn't get any clearer in trying to put down that it absolutely won't do that in this particular policy.
I hear you, but I also would say the policy should be your minimum, that should be your floor, not your aspirational.
Right.
And so by looking at that language, it feels like what we're saying is this is aspirational. That's great for a mission statement,
Right.
not your policy. So when we put in our policy that we don't take away recess from kids as punishment, that's your floor.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue this whole section actually doesn't belong in policy that is an aspirational. I'm not sure why it was put into policy in the first place. Doesn't make sense. I totally agree with you right there. Policy is not aspirational. So I'm not sure what was this thinking behind putting it in there was.
And this is essential?
Well, I would go ahead and say, sorry if I may finish up on this,
Yeah.
that taking away recess for kids shouldn't be aspirational. We don't take away recess from kids. I mean, that's my personal opinion,
Yep.
that the kids that they need to get their wiggles out, there's probably a reason that they need to get their wiggles out.
Right.
And now, I say this not being in an elementary school every day,
Right.
and giving great deference to those who are, but I do truly believe that we do need to look at our policies as being our floor.
That was our conversation in our June meeting. We had a
Okay.
huge conversation
Sorry,
about.
I feel like I'm coming from a second.
No, that's why I was letting you know, that was a big discussion, we all agreed, like, yes.
That's why.
Yeah, and please don't think that I'm arguing that I think that recess should be taken away as a regular way to discipline students, because that's actually not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is it shouldn't be in a 6700 policy. It should be addressed in a student discipline policy, and we have a committee that could be brought to craft language around really making it clear, because sometimes recess is a time where restorative conversations take place. Sometimes recess is a time where a reteaching type of a thing. So when you're thinking of recess being taken away, I'm just going to take it away, you're going to sit there for the entire time and you're not going to do anything. That would be more of a disciplinary thing, and that would probably be, it most likely would be not appropriate. But there are some other things that maybe could happen during a recess period that would be appropriate for that, and I think that would be best for that existing committee to wrestle with, come up with language, and then bring that in a policy revision to the board that is not in the 6700.
Is this stated anywhere else in our policies about recess being taken away?
No, it's not a state law, and that's part of, we did some research. A lot of times policy is state law. It is not a law in Washington State that it cannot be taken away. And
I would argue about taking it out then, because I wouldn't want to leave that in if it's not anywhere else in our policies, and then do a cross-reference to disciplinary policies. So that way, if we ever get there, it's there. I would like to leave it as is and add a cross-reference policy.
I totally agree that I think it needs to remain there with a cross-reference, definitely.
As aspirational, so when people contact you at this point and say,
Director Hamada said.
Say, hey, your policy says you can't do this, then you need to be ready to respond. If we leave it in there in this aspirational language, that's the case. It's an aspiration, it's not they can't.
I think I'm confused.
Okay.
Honestly, help me to understand, because I think this is a problem that comes up a lot that I see, is the kids, whether we realize it or not, lecturing them or taking them aside or something during a time when they're moving around physically. If they move around physically for their social, emotional language, all that additive is going to help them, so you can talk to them better maybe when they're out and done with moving around and doing their PE. That's what I see. So, I'm a little confused. I understand that if this is going to create problems for us, but help me to understand that better, because I don't get it.
I think what you're saying, most everybody would agree with that works in a school system or at elementary around not taking away recess because kids need their wiggles out. There's a couple things I'm saying. First off, right now, this is something that is largely implemented by teachers. And so if we pass a policy right here, like within the next couple weeks, without having any conversations with elementary principals about what are the alternatives, what are things that they can do otherwise in order to do those reteachings, and really clarifying what do we mean by you can't take recess away. Except when we're doing restorative practices, except when we're doing reteaching, except when they just assaulted somebody and we're sending them to the office. We've technically just taken away their recess, and it says in policy we can't. So these are the things that a committee that looks at discipline policies will wrestle with and try to put very specific language in to help everybody understand what is meant by a statement like this. This is a statement in a nutrition policy that people wouldn't go looking toward. That's not where discipline policies lie.
We have this nowhere else, so I feel like we need to keep it here until we decide that recess policy, at least for me, because I'm a one that even with all those things you said, I don't think we should take recess away as punishment for students. Now, ultimately, there's other things that happen that we can't control, like disciplinary actions that are outside of that. But ultimately, I don't think recess should be taken away, even for restorative practices or things like that, because students in elementary need that. So I guess that's just my 2 cents, but I think we need to leave this in here until we actually have a policy. I don't want this not in here until something else is decided.
I would suggest removing the language in the parenthesis, which will not be used or withheld as punishment for any reason, and just keeping it as recess, that we will provide recess. I would hate to remove opportunities, being library helpers. 5th and 6th grade, go into the library and help shelf books. Can I tell you, that was one of the best brain breaks, I think, for a lot of kids. And, you know, they're still getting around, moving, and I don't think we want to take away those things.
Right.
Being able to mentor towards, you know, the younger students, if that's what they would like to do during the recess, as an option. Whatever those things are, but I think we can still encompass that as a district, we want to provide recess.
Right.
But the very specific language of punishment for any reason, I think is, it doesn't set the floor.
Oh, boy.
Couldn't we leave that language there, but define it in the procedure?
We're still gonna run into the same problem, which is it doesn't, in my opinion, it does not belong in a 6,000 series policy. It should be where everybody else looks for in terms of student discipline. So when someone, a parent or somebody is looking to see whether this was accurate or should my school have been able to do this or not, they're not gonna go looking at a nutrition policy. They're gonna be looking at the discipline policy and procedure. And if one of the things that this committee, the discipline committee that looks at this policy and the procedure usually meets in the spring. However, if the board feels like this is something that needs to happen sooner to really address this and come up with language around recess, we could convene it earlier to try to see if we can come if that would make you feel better about removing it from here and trying to put it where it appropriately belongs.
Mr. Heath,
Yeah.
help me to understand, because here's
Okay.
the problem I have. I wouldn't want the parentheses removed,
Right.
because it needs to be defined, but this is not just a nutrition, it's nutrition, health, and physical education. So it is speaking to their well-being overall. Again, I guess I'm not getting your concept of why it just belongs and doesn't belong in here.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we're struggling because this is an essential policy for nutrition services only. I would argue actually some of these things around physical education actually belong in a different place also under the 2000 series, which has to do with curriculum. And I think there's always a danger of putting language that have to do with things in the wrong place because people won't go looking for it there.
But recess is not part of curriculum.
No, recess, but if we're talking about that's why I would actually support the suggestion of taking the parentheses out. I think recess is recognized as part of a wellness. If we're talking about not removing it for any reason, for disciplinary reasons, that really should be addressed in our student discipline policy and procedures.
I like cross-reference. I think you could put it both places. Yeah. And I'd have these people start meeting earlier if we can't come to a conclusion here. I mean, I just think that getting our kids just ready to learn and healthy is so important.
Right.
And I'm not trying to argue, because I understand you have a lot more experience in how this works too, but I just think it's got to put it out there, and I know that the state has tried to get actual laws in place to get more recess and not taken away for any reason, and they haven't been successful yet. But I'd like to be a leading school district that emphasizes this.
Minus people not finding it, what's the harm of leaving it? Like, is someone gonna come spank us? Are we gonna get fined? Are we gonna get into legal trouble? Like, I don't foresee any of those things happening.
So if you're leaving it and you're expecting that, so I guess that's the question is what does the board think this actually says? So what this says is this is the aspirational of a district wellness overall philosophy. And if we're all clear on that, so when different people in the community reach out because their kids' recess has been taken away, and you're able to explain that, no, actually the policy doesn't say that they can't do that, that this is as per, that we believe that recess, what this is stating is part of an overall wellness for students. We believe recess is an important part of that. And I think you'd find very few people that would argue that point. But if we're looking at trying to say that recess cannot be taken away for any reason, then we really need to, I think, get greater voice from our elementary staff, for one, around is this appropriate? And if it is appropriate, which I think a lot of them probably will agree that it is appropriate, we shouldn't be taking them away, then what are our other options to do some of the things that may be happening right now when that has taken place? And we should give them some time to wrestle with that question before just imposing it on them.
Yeah, I can hear that point of view, because,
Yeah.
and I would hate if I were a teacher and somebody was trying to tell me how to do my job when I've done it for 30 years.
Right.
And know better than that person, that they needed to ask me. I get that, but I mean, again, I really just think it's so important.
I state my opinion that I think that we need to remove the parentheses, just like the first bullet point which says quality physical education. It doesn't go into detail what quality physical education is. There's a separate policy for what that looks like, and that belongs there. Here, we believe that they should have recess. The duration of recess, what they have available at recess, all of that should be put in discipline options within the district, should be in the discipline policy. And I don't believe that giving a short snippet in the wrong place, nor do I want to be in a place where we potentially put schools in jeopardy of our policy, because that, again, policy is the floor. And so I again restate, I think that the parentheses should be removed.
So if I may, this is good discussion. I recall Vice President Bennell, we actually also discussed why it was to put physical education, nutrition in one place. We had kind of a little bit of a conversation.
Yes.
I want to go back to what both you and Dr. Margill said earlier, that we don't have it in discipline, under the discipline policy at this point. And I thought I heard you say, Vice President Bennell, that even here cross-referencing and until which time, right, that we have something. And then back to your point, Director Margill, which was well put. I think what you just said earlier and just now, we want to make sure that we're not binding the hands of our staff and students, because the word that a couple words came to mind was, what about student voice in this, right? If I do want to be the one that, shells books, or, I have other things that that's the way I get my, wiggle out, potentially. That's what we want to be able to do. And so I'm trying to see if there might be, so if I go to, Ms. Holly, if you go to the language, highlight it, so that we all are clear about the language that you shared that potentially needs to be deleted. And also, Vice President Bennell, the language let's keep it in there and cross-reference until which time we're able to address it with this committee, potentially, that maybe has students on it, that we could, maybe come to that kind of a consensus. So if you look at that, that's the current language.
It's 3240.
I'm trying to find the cross-reference.
The cross-reference for the policy, student discipline.
Yeah, 3241.
Okay. Yeah.
So if I'm hearing this right, and correct me if I'm wrong, are we doing this, or are we leaving that other section?
I would feel more comfortable leaving
it
until we change the policy. I would be my comfort level.
Yes.
And then at that time, then we can make that decision to change this. That's how, I would feel more comfortable with that.
And that's why I wanted it up there,
Right,
so
right.
we're all seeing the same thing.
Right.
So Director Margill, your thoughts?
I still have the idea that a policy is the floor, and I would hate for people to look at our policies and say, but you're not following your policy. And so sometimes that's why things are written very broadly, and,
May I suggest if we took out for any reason, because that's so definitive, would it be until we get it in discipline? Would it be not be withheld as punishment? Because maybe it's not as definitive as for any reason.
I'd be much more comfortable with that.
I think I agree with that.
I agree with that.
Me too, yeah.
But my brain goes to just like social justice work and just understanding like the school to prison pipeline. I don't want to treat little elementary kids like prisoners or whatever. Like we're gonna withhold your visa. Like I just don't want get out of that practice of that view, because I don't want to. The school to prison pipeline thing is real. I don't want to penalize students, because my guess is certain students would get penalized. And so I want to make sure that we don't ever take away stuff that benefits students like recess. So I just want to make that clear.
In looking at this, does the board feel there's a consensus on it at this point this way?
Could you increase the font?
Yeah, sure.
I wanna make sure, I'm sorry, I wanna make sure.
I like the which will not be withheld for punishment. I appreciate that specifically.
Yes, correct.
Because again, you know, I don't wanna yuck someone's yum, and my daughter really wanted to work in the library during recess. And I think that we need to encourage what your brain break is. And I understand that this is a physical activity section, but.
And restorative conversation, you know, we're not throwing that under punishment.
Yep.
Is that helpful?
And I appreciated the superintendent's comment about getting student voice, and that does bring me to my question, if I'm sorry to move along a little bit. It does say the wellness committee. Do we have student voice on the wellness committee?
For this policy, at this point, I don't know. What we have is, we're getting a committee together.
Okay.
And the wellness committee, it has a list of people who shall be permitted to attend, but are not required to attend. So I know that Sarah Dunlao, who's our Assistant Director of Business Services, which Business Services has nutrition services under it. They are working with Sherry Simpson, the Director of Student and Family Support Services, and they're getting a wellness committee together. So I don't know who all will be on it at this point, but that's definitely something that can be included.
The students should be, even if it doesn't say explicitly,
It
we
should
can
be.
include it. We can include it.
Yes.
One thing you're gonna get is elementary kids passionate about lunches.
Yes.
And recess.
Kids that are passionate about lunch.
Yes. The other question I had was under physical activity, the second to last bullet, said active transportation.
Yeah.
What's inactive transportation? I'm trying to figure out, is that activity transportation?
I'm not
Right
sure
there.
where you're looking, I'm sorry.
It's the
there.
second bulletin from the bottom.
To the bottom.
From the bottom. Oh. Active transportation, I'm not sure.
Yeah, this was.
I was just, again, trying to figure out how you transport somebody inactively. So, I think we need to do something with that word.
Okay, let me check on it.
Thank you.
Director Clark, I'm sorry.
I hate to make it more complex,
But you will do.
I would have put in the previous recommendation, withheld, no, don't move it,
Oh, you don't want it back up to recess?
no,
Yep, okay,
well, no, I want, go down,
down, okay.
stop.
Okay,
Recess, which will not be withheld for punishment unless there are specific safety issues.
Say more, Director Clark, I think I know where you're going, but say more about that.
Well, the obvious problem is you had a conflict within class and you're trying to separate the, well, my favorite, in the hallway on the way out to recess. And you don't want that spilling out onto the playground.
Yeah. That could be an issue.
So verbiage you'd like to see in there?
Oh, boy, now we're getting in trouble.
Now we're getting.
Now we're getting into, I did it.
No, I-
Again, this is why I feel it's better to not have specific, the procedures put in with policy. Policy is their floor, procedures of how it's done, that needs to be somewhere separate.
And we started by saying there was a lot of procedure in the past, and that's where we've been going, and a lot of our laws, the policy, that's why it's real important that districts, not just Kent School District, take a look at a lot of the model policies, because that's exactly what is there, and so we have to make them to what the board here feels. But to Director Clark, would you say that will, which right now it says which will not be withheld for punishment, that in the situation that you just brought up, because I think I know what you're saying, that if there is a situation occurring that really would be held under a discipline policy, whether that's during recess, after, before, after school, it could be at any time. That the comment here still stands that you could still follow through with the discipline pieces that you need to, but as it relates to nutrition services and this policy, does the statement here forego us or a school doing that under a policy?
Oh, boy.
And what I'm saying is, I think this says it well enough that we would not, what you just, in your phrase, that would be taken care of under their discipline, right? Is what I'm getting at. Would that be a friendly thought?
I'm basically, I'm agreeing with Megan.
Yeah.
That's what it comes down to.
If we did this, let me see, look at it this way. If we did this where we left just recess, but we also cross-reference student discipline, so that there's something about recess or discipline, would that be acceptable?
What does 3241 say, actually?
I don't know, but we'll find out.
I got to hear that too.
I have some information about active transportation, by the way, when we're ready for
great.
that.
I can get to 3241 in just a second.
Yeah, so the question right now, is it in 23041, 3240?
So recess is, and I've looked at this policy and procedure many times. I don't ever remember seeing it address recess specifically. And so that's one thing we would, basically, it would fall under detention, the rules of detention, because recess would be a form of detention. So any kind of wording. But what I think I'm hearing the board say is we want recess specifically addressed in the policy and procedure in 3241, and that's what I suggested that we bring back to the committee, that language specifically, so that it's not left up to interpretation, that people reading our policy and procedure will be very clear around what the expectations around recess are, and I'd like to do that with the committee, because I feel like there's different perspectives that are brought when we do committee work that we oftentimes don't think of. And that's what I would say the best practice of how we've done it in the past, and this is what I'm suggesting.
My only concern about that is that if we're gonna have this for another, up for reading and stuff, it needs to be right the way it's gonna be, right?
We can bring it back again to the next work session.
Yeah, by that I might even forget it.
No, I mean, we could, keep that language until we ratify this policy.
What we could do is make all the changes that were suggested tonight. We can bring it forward, you guys will see it before the vote
Right.
at the next regular board meeting,
Right.
well ahead of time, at your 2x2 to know if it's the way you want it to read. If it's not, you vote it down and we move on to putting it back onto another work session. Would that be acceptable?
What did we agree upon tonight, how it was gonna be left alone?
Sure.
I'm sorry,
No, you're fine.
cause I don't know what we agreed upon.
I don't want it struck out.
I don't want
You
that
don't
struck
want it
out,
struck
I wanna
out.
keep that,
Okay.
And I don't want it struck out, so.
I wanna keep that until we come back. Yes,
Like this.
yes,
So I think I hear at least
right.
consensus that it would go this way.
You are agreeing though to remove the language for any reason?
Yes, just like it's
Okay.
presented right there.
As it is up here.
Yes.
Okay,
Can I ask a question?
sure.
Okay, can you do the Safe Routes to School program? It's like the bicycle safety, it's a grant from OSPI. Anybody know?
We
Okay.
can find out.
Alright, so active transportation according to the CDC and OSPI is any self-propelled human-powered mode of transportation such as walking or bicycling. So I think that with active transportation, with physical activities, talking about the importance of like bicycle safety, things like that. That's why I was curious if we had a Safe Routes to School program. Cause I know it's grants that OSPI has that teaches, I think mostly middle schoolers, about how to bike safely to and from home.
Right.
Yeah, I do know there are units that have had, other bike, unicycles and things like that. Others too, but I know I've seen unicycles, units.
So there we go. Thank you OSPI and CDC.
We're ready to move on?
Unbelievably, I think so.
Wow.
Enlightening debate.
Terrific, we've got one down.
Scratching my head for that.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
This is the work. Those of you who are watching, right? It's exciting stuff.
Really exciting.
Okay. Our next one is 1815, ethical conduct for school director, second reading. We had this prior in the spring. We didn't move anywhere on it. It's brand new to us, but it is, WASDA put it in 2021. So let me get to that one.
This is the document we wanted to merge. Oh, okay, you were about to say that, right?
Yep, we merged our 1002,
Yeah.
which we have and
Right.
WASDA did not have.
Yeah.
Right, right.
And I believe Director Farah, you asked me about the bullets at the bottom, that's been included in the update,
Nice.
and that's showing here.
Nice.
Director Margell had a question about it. She wanted to know, let's see, on the portion that talks about ensuring the community is accurately informed about the Kent School District and that the Kent School District staff understands and values the community perspective regarding education in the Kent School District. She wanted to know, how does the board do this? Do they work with the executive team?
Just to clarify my comment, I was wondering if maybe the insertion of ensure the community is accurately informed in partnership with, basically, we're not the ones who are sending out the communication necessarily to the entire district. We're just making sure it happens and that there's a partnership for making that happen. It felt like that there might have been a little, yes.
So might the board consider, through two-way communication or through something like that, since it is one of our old areas, or language like, through the use of, KSD communication, try to find language that the board might consider.
Through existing channels, the ones that we have, yes.
through the use of KSD communication, regular communication, or,
I mean, again, if this is the policy, the procedure would say what that would be, right? So we could say communication, and the procedures could say, we're gonna use whatever ones
Yeah.
we have, right?
so this policy does not have a matching procedure right now. The board would need to put something in place if we're gonna go down the procedure on this.
Hence how it's written, and like I said earlier, was that oftentimes we'll put the policy, a lot of procedure within it.
We could say through the use of regular KSD communication channels.
Yeah.
That's what I was kinda trying to get at.
Lester.
Oh, sorry, Tim.
I originally wrote up an amendment to this, and I don't know if Dr. Harmon felt that she had merged it, given the language I'm seeing up there, but I will read what I thought I
Okay.
had submitted. Abstain from posting on media platforms other than the official position taken by the board once a vote on any issue has been taken until there is a change in the makeup of the board.
I would say no. I feel like that takes away people's First Amendment rights. So immediately I would say no way.
So you time out. This is about board directors and how they interact with the public. And that original policy suggestion was to basically prevent people from keeping dead issues alive and causing division within the community. So First Amendment rights don't hold up when in fact you as a policy maker have participated in the decision.
I don't know if I agree, but you can have that opinion.
I have a question for Director Clark. You mentioned you shared that with,
I thought I brought it up in the previous meeting, but obviously that was many months ago, I'm just taking it from.
and the reason I wanted to get it up there so that we can see it. Dr. Harmon?
I was gonna say, so good evening, board. I apologize, Director Clark. I thought I'd placed the language in there as it was written, and I'm sorry for not putting it in there directly. I think the only portion in there is about up into the makeup of the board, but not the direct, the information about refraining from, so I apologize for that.
Thank you very much, Dr.
Yeah.
I would also say that you mentioned and we're discussing about getting into procedures for this. Because these are 1,000 series, if the board is interested in procedures, these are policies where the board governs itself. So the board would have to, this is the one exception to the staff developing procedures. This would be the board helping develop procedures because it's around how the board handles itself.
Just so you can see what Director Clark had handwritten, this is the last bullet point.
Can I ask a clarifying question? Why specifically just posting on social media platforms as opposed to publicly declaring in any form?
Well, should a participant in the decision decide that they didn't get enough support and were trying to drum up more support to change the board, they would obviously be recruiting people to come in and address the board of directors about an issue where we've already arrived at the decision. Because, the whole point is we are local officials in a part-time job that obviously can't devote all of our lives in terms of fulfilling our duties on the board. And you can create a destructive culture if you just simply say it's not open. And that's why, literally, of course, the concept was admittedly, there could be a change that takes place. And if there is a change in the makeup of the board, then conceivably that gets addressed. But what you don't want to set up is one side attacking another side, and there's no change in the board. So all you're doing is keeping alive a dead issue.
Well, and quite frankly, that's happened, Director Clark, but I'm afraid that it kind of takes away some of my, I'd be so afraid to write anything, it's the thing. I don't know.
I mean, I kind of see what Director Clark is saying, because it happened here at this dais. And
I do believe the oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were.
I mean, I wouldn't even stop it at social media. I would say any communication, because the board is one, right? We don't act separate. We're not individuals. We are one entity. So when we vote as one entity. We don't vote individually. And I remember seeing hearing at this dais, board members saying, I'm not gonna sign this policy because I didn't vote for it. And that really was something I couldn't understand, because we are one. When we're talking as one. So I would even add to any, when a vote happens, however it goes, we all have to be abided by.
Well, that's in our protocol guidelines.
It's actually, yes.
We don't need it here, and I don't like this at all. And I think there's going with the board decision, and then there's also toxic positivity, where like everything's great, we're awesome, everything's amazing, and I think that's not okay. Like, I'm not gonna sit up here and just be toxic positive about things I don't necessarily agree with, and I have a voice, I have First Amendment rights, I can disagree. I can still go along with the board, because that's my role. I can disagree if I don't like something, and I have. Like, and
that's what we're saying.
That's okay.
I think that's what Director Clark is saying, is that yes, you can have your individual opinion, but once the vote happens, the board acted, and that vote has to be supported by the whole board.
Correct.
I was gonna pull up the protocol so you guys could see it.
Could I ask that the board also look at bullet number, whoops, it's gone. That I think is actually saying that.
Where?
But I wanna make sure Director Clark would say, yeah, I think it is or not. And that is bullet, shared responsibility. So,
Yeah,
2,
here it
3,
is.
share the responsibility of all board decisions regardless of individual votes.
Yes.
So, the responsibility,
Mm-hmm.
you know, because we could that bullet that's in yellow down below
Right.
be considered as responsibility and not have to put it in that language.
Oh, okay, so, and what I'm trying to take issue with is what Vice President Bento referred to, which is, yes, you may not like the outcome of the vote, but the issue here is taking it public. And there's damage when you do that. And I'm just trying to get at, if you make it too broad and too general without getting at the problem, you run the risk of interpretation.
But there's a procedure with this policy, right?
We do not have it.
We're gonna talk about, isn't there something about addressing school director violations? Like that's, I think, would be a better
18.
place.
Yeah, that's 18.
Yep.
I don't think that's.
1825.
1825, yeah.
Going on to next.
Right. We had this argument last. I remember this.
Yeah.
I really remember this, and this is what I mean, is that we even pushed it back because, you know, those of us who were on this dais couldn't agree on. So,
I mean, I would take the pink over that last yellow, because I think the pink says what the yellow says.
but the pink is too broad. That's what I see also, is that it's too broad, and I want it to be more specific, because I can tell you this, it was toxic having 1 or 2 board members speak on the votes that have happened on social media, and we've seen that. So that's one of the things that this yellow part is addressing.
Yeah, and that's why I brought that bullet up.
Okay.
I think Vice President Bennett, the word responsibility, there's more to that, right?
Yeah.
The vote's been taken, and it does state regardless of your vote. And what I think Director Clark, you're getting at is, then what impact does that have on us as a board now, that whatever the vote was, it's still a whole board that now accurately now is moving forward with that as a board versus separate.
All right, can I direct a question to the lawyer? So, how endangered are we by leaving it simply under responsibility?
I'll have Mr. Brockwell will come up and answer that question.
Good evening, President Amata, members of the board. The question was, I guess I'm a little confused, Director Clark. The question was responsibility.
Right. The superintendent suggested that using that simple phrase we have up there, share the responsibility, would in fact enable us to deal with someone not conforming in their public posture.
It's helpful. To be quite honest with you, I have not analyzed the broader question that Director Benno brought up, which is this an unreasonable infringement on the First Amendment rights held by a board director? There is a good policy reason for it, but the question is whether that justifies the policy. And I have not researched that in this context.
And Mr. Barksdale, I mean, I've tried to act responsibly in what I've done and stuff, but my right to speak on anything in any place is valid to me too, as a woman especially. And yes, we need to work together as a board and take responsibility on that. I just don't think you're gonna ever write something that's gonna keep all that down and buttoned up the way it probably should be, unless we work together as a team and be more responsible about what we're doing every day. I don't think you're gonna write a policy in here, because I personally am not gonna vote for something that takes away every bit of my personal ability to say anything, on anything.
We do have before you tonight another policy that talks about board conduct and censuring. Now, for example, if not any one of you, but if there was another board member that happened to get on the board and acted up and said some outrageous things, well, within his or her right perhaps to do so under the First Amendment, even without this language, the board could take that up on a censure.
They can.
So there is another sort of remedy when things get out of bounds without trying to tie it down in advance.
Yeah.
I think Vice President Bennett, you were saying there's another policy that I think it's on violation that perhaps
We were talking about
protocol. That's what it was. Yeah.
But also, I just, as a general rule, I think about colonialism and certain groups of people telling other people what they're allowed and not allowed to do. And I struggle with this last bullet point as a way of an entity, an institution, telling people that they don't have a right to speak on something. That's very problematic to me.
Except, I remind you, the difference here is you are participating in making the policy. And so this addresses having the group stand together once they have arrived at a discussion. And it's not the same as you being a member of a household serviced by this district that has a complaint about the policy as it exists, because you make the policy.
I mean, I would refer you to like our Congress and our Senate, where they make similar votes, and there's people who speak out constantly. So that would be my rebuttal.
And in fact, that same similar situation exists on a city council. But there's the trap. You are in fact elected, and your duties include your right to fight for a specific position, whatever. It isn't that way on school boards because you don't have it as a full-time job, and you run the risk of creating so much disunity that you can't get your basic work done because you're keeping dead issues alive.
But this unity is not against the law or policy. Like, we don't have to have perfect harmony. That's my problem with like this idea of toxic positivity.
And the issue is when you take it public. That's the issue I'm driving at.
Well, I kind of disagree, Tim. And I mean, I've been the source of dealing with a lot of problems because of it, you know, from personal attacks and stuff, but I'm still, you're not gonna shut me up if I have something to say. It's just not gonna happen. I fought for my rights as a woman.
I don't think Director Clark means taking away your.
No, I know.
I don't think he
but
means
it can
that.
it can go to that extent.
It probably, you know, should be worded, you know, something like abstain from speaking ill about a vote or something to that effect. But I mean, I don't see it.
That's in our procedures, and it's in the pink one. Like if
The
there's
pink one, yeah, share.
But if we look at our document that was just pulled up, it's on there.
Is it on there?
It's on the board protocol, and I can pull it up.
It's in 2 other places.
Okay.
Already.
Right.
So even if it doesn't make it here, it's still there.
It's still gonna be over. I mean,
But I would just say that Director Clark's point, in my view, is well taken.
Right.
Because what Jewel was saying is that this is how you govern yourselves.
Right.
And you can agree to this, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just a condition of
I would just add to this, and that's why I brought up what's in pink there is that, this is good, healthy conversation, because I think as we continue to work together as board superintendent governance team, that these are the things we really need to get out into the open.
Yeah.
And language is important. We just heard that this policy is not a procedure. This is where the board governs themselves. And we do have a couple other policies we're gonna be looking at that perhaps that might be where language can be considered there. But back to responsibility, I brought that out because there's a whole lot more under responsibility that each board has outside of just the vote. But the vote's critical, and that's what we're talking about right now. It is, once we do make a decision as a board, how do we move forward supporting it as a whole? You don't lose your right to freedom of speech. It is how do you move forward? I believe that's the intent. Director Muriel or Director O'Wally.
I remember this. I really remember this, having this same conversation about that policy. So in the interest of time, I'm okay with, just to make sure that we make it very clear that we are one entity, that we take a vote, and when we take a vote, that is it's binding.
This is number 4 on the board protocol, which was adopted by resolution. Once the board reaches a decision, all board members will support the decision of the majority.
Yeah.
All right.
So it's already in there on that one.
Okay.
It's another sort of, Madam President, if I may just interject one moment. There is another layer to this, is the contract the board has with its superintendent.
Right.
When 3 votes or 2 votes, as the case may be, direct him to do something, he is then duty bound to carry out the board's wishes. If there is a constant pull on that direction, the remaining board members doing that may be interfering with his ability to get the job done. And you may be inadvertently breaching the contract. So it's not something we think about too much, but it's there.
Right.
So we have it, as Mr. Brockvogel said, we have it in our protocol, we have it in the superintendent's contract. If we take this out and move on to 1825, and we talk about discipline of board member, would that be acceptable to the board to move on and do that? Are we good with taking that out and relying on these other things? Is that a consensus that I'm hearing the board say?
I'd like to hear from Director again.
For me specifically, I agree that, I said this in my interview, I very much believe we play for the name on the front of our jersey, and that's who we play for. But paramount to all of that is freedom of speech. I mean, as a public school, we know that doesn't end on the dais, that doesn't end in our classrooms, that doesn't end anywhere. And so, I would, while I do believe that the decisions made of the board need to be supported, and I would say, which is missing from this language, is that you don't actively work against the board, and there needs to be some type of language, I believe, that should be put in there. I have a harder time with the specificity, being so specific, I'm gonna go with that form. Being so specific about being social media, because I think that you can just as easily stand on a soapbox and be harmful to the board. You do have to conduct yourself whether on the dais or outside or behind a keyboard, in a way that is in support of the district and the board at all times.
I just thought about a word that you just said, in support. So if the board would consider in the pink, share responsibility of all board decisions, share the responsibility to support of all board decisions regardless of the individual vote. And just trying to find some language that speaks to what you just said, Director Margot, and then not have to be, because I agree with you, that's one platform. There's all kinds of platforms that you can share their lack of support. But anyway, just threw that out for the board to consider.
Maybe to be concise, share the responsibility and support all board decisions.
Yes. Yeah, that's what I said originally.
Yes.
Share responsibility and support all board decisions.
Regardless of individual votes.
Support all board decisions. So share the responsibility of our. So right after responsibility, put and support. Correct? I think that's.
Okay, it's not exactly what I was saying, because I still believe that you have the right to disagree with the board, but there's still a way to be able to voice your opinion and not work against the board.
That's what I'm at, yeah.
And no, I don't necessarily agree that you should be able to say whatever you want, whenever you want. We can't, we have confidentiality, we have, other things that come into play on that, and that's what, that's talks about in this document here. But, I think that you support the board and you support KSD. I'm, how we wordsmith that, I'm not.
I just heard you say it.
Yeah.
I mean, I like that better, but I hear what you're saying, yeah.
Because we can't get things done if we're all just here continually throwing sand in each other's faces. And in the end, there's a district that needs to run, and
So, sorry, Director Margell, will you say what you would like it to, how you think it should be worded, so I can at least put it up when we can look at it?
can I propose keeping the language in pink as it was and adding a separate bullet of actively support KSD and the KSD board? I think it is somewhere, but it's not in here. And it feels like it should,
That's saying it more in a proactive way.
Yes.
Versus a negative way. Actively support.
I mean, I don't love it, but I will support it. I don't love how it's phrased, but I hear what you're saying.
and I'm very open to other language in it. And
This is just to look at.
Yeah.
It's a reading that we can come back to.
I think we've reached a point where by compromise, we've gotten to something that we can all live with.
Thank you, Director Clark, and actually all of you. It is, we were hearing and I heard all of you, so I was trying to take the language and put it in places that I hear the spirit that the board agrees with. And again, I'll repeat, it's not about taking your freedom of speech away. It really is about the language we can work together with to move forward once decisions are made as a board.
And honestly, nothing is wrong with, while we're discussing, fighting for what you believe in and expressing, your opinion on any issue. But once the vote happens, it's time to move on.
Sure, everybody's passionate about their thoughts on
Absolutely.
certain things, but it's at when the vote's taken and
Right.
the majority happens, this is saying that the board will support that vote.
And I, dare I say, and I will, because I believe in model from the classroom to the boardroom. And I've said that before, that we're modeling how to compromise and share, hey, Vice President, I didn't, not all there, but you know what, I can support that. I think that's what we wanna be able to do, for, our constituents, our students, in particular our students, because they don't agree. You heard that on June 15th, when they were here talking to us, which was interesting. But you notice how they started to kind of sway with each other, and they would say themselves, I kind of agree or I kind of disagree. Remember that. We are definitely modeling what we want to have happen with our students, so thank you for engaging.
Board members were 2 for 2, right? 2 for 2.
could you, I'm sorry, there was one word I want to check on.
Sure.
I saw that there was a correction made to the she and he, and thank you for that correction.
I think I put there, but I still need to go through and probably update some of these other policies. Give me just a second to get back there.
Director Margot, which, in this last policy?
Yes, in this last policy that we were looking at, it said recognize that he, or his/her responsibility, and I want to make that more general language to those who choose
Got it, okay.
non-binary. And then it seems to me that there was something about, that there's almost like one belief system within the district, and so I just wanted to add one more word in. The board commits to take the time necessary to understand the beliefs and, sorry, in addition, the policy, statement standards, the board of directors, that one, right at the end where it says understand the beliefs, and I would propose that we would add the word varied beliefs in there, as if there's not just one set of beliefs by the entire school district. There's a body of beliefs held by different people and they're varied. Just with the sentence before, it seems to reference that there's like a Kent School District like beliefs.
Board commits to taking the time necessary to understand the beliefs, acquire the knowledge, and develop the skills necessary to. And so you think.
I propose to put the word varied.
Varied. What does the rest of the board think?
Hi, Ben.
Feel good about that?
Can you highlight it?
Sure, yep.
That they can see the.
Yeah, I see that.
Also, the idea that there's also different ways to get to different solutions, regardless of belief systems. Like it could be like reading, like the reading comprehension beliefs or math skills. Like there's varying beliefs, and just understanding that there's a lot of different beliefs.
Yes.
Too. Yes.
Yep.
I would agree with that.
I didn't see his or her, I didn't see.
Yeah, I'm looking as well.
It's in my copy that I have, that it was in the second to last bullet. Recognize that it now says there up on the board.
Oh, yeah, so it's,
Yeah.
yes. Good.
Those are the end of my questions, thank you.
Great. Okay, we're on to 1825. Okay. This, again, is new to KSD.
Is this a first reading? Did we see this?
Yes.
This is a first reading.
This is first.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Did we look at this before?
It looks like, it seems like it, right?
Feels like we
Wait,
looked
I
at
really,
this
I,
before.
It was connected to, it came on the same time as 1815, but we
Right.
didn't go any further on 1815.
15, oh,
So we
yeah,
didn't
okay,
jump
I
to
see, I see.
1825.
Because I remember seeing this
Yeah.
number.
Yes, it's been on there, we just didn't get to it.
Okay, okay.
Have it.
Because 1815 was such,
This provides a process which will intensify as things go on. It starts off with conversation and can go forward through censure in an open meeting, is the way this policy has been written.
I didn't have any comments as a new policy. I just like the idea of like progressive discipline versus just like, we're gonna censure you immediately. Like progressive discipline is something that generally works just across the board, so.
I also see the cross-reference of what we just finished with, right?
1815.
1815 there,
Yep.
or once we get it to the board's liking.
Everybody good to move on? Any other comments? Okay, we're on to 2021. So 2021 is very important to the board because of the different things that have come up lately about library, and I know the board's been interested in this. And I think the main thing we need to come up with is what the board's philosophy is on what a school, the purpose of a school library. Is it strictly for supplementing educational resources for curriculum? Is it for expanding knowledge? Is it, I mean, we have so many things that it could be used for, but the board is gonna have to come up with a philosophy on what the purpose is, and I have a PowerPoint that I wanna show you. Here are just some of, and this was posted online, so this has been up for people to view, just some of the different thoughts on what the library, a school, the purpose of a K-12 public library. And again, we have to separate it. This is not any library in the city. It's what the purpose is of a school library. So you can read through those, and there are more. So we have to come to a determination of what the board's philosophy is on what a school library's purpose is. And if you've been able to read through those, I'll pull back up the policy.
I just feel like I'm not, like, are you asking for like input for how that should be changed? Because I just feel like I'm not qualified to, like, I would want to hear from librarians before I determine like what we think the purpose of a library is, just because like I saw King County Library in Federal Way open up like a maker space, and I was like, oh, that's so cool. Like some libraries have like tool rental, or like you can rent, and I know that's public libraries, but as far as like school libraries, I think I would need kind of more information, because I think I heard like one of the high schools was gonna do like a maker type of space where they're gonna have like 3D printers and stuff like that. I'm like, that's awesome. But so like, I feel like what you just showed us like encompasses some of that, but encompasses a lot of that, but I just feel like I would want to hear more from librarians about the purpose before we would decide that. Like there's some other specific things in here I think we can talk about, at least for me, like I don't feel comfortable making that like decision tonight. This is a first reading, right?
It is a first reading for us. So it's something to think about. No decision has to be made tonight, but something to think about as far as what our philosophy as a board, your philosophy as a board is. Also, the title's changed, and it's Library Information and Technology Programs. Our DARTS team, they do a procurement for technology, and I think in February of 2021, they brought to the board the pilot program of K-12 electronic resources. So we have digital coaches that help out in the libraries. So just so you're aware, it's not just the librarian taking all that on, both pieces of that.
And I'm gonna do a shout out to Northwood Middle School and Mrs. Dacus that's there. Coolest library that you can go into. They have a piano, the kids play it. It's not shh, quiet. Like you go in there and like it's a place of like it restores your soul. And I love that you bring up different areas that have different libraries, and that's one that I really love. And just reading through your list, it just made me smile because, well, I love libraries and I think they're really cool. And but what I'm trying to kind of further from what Director Benno was saying was, I guess, what is the problem that we're trying to solve when you're asking those questions? And maybe if it was given to me in a little bit more specific, then that would help me, because I think a library can be a lot of these things or some of those things, and I give a lot of deference to the professional staff that we hire to come up with the needs of their school to be able to fit that. But is there a specific issue that we're trying to solve that because we haven't defined it, we can't make a policy around it?
I think let me speak to that issue, because I was at the WASP training over in Walla Walla, and this came up. And they had a whole panel discussion by their student body and by the staff, because they've gone through so many book challenges. And one of the things that they felt that every school, and most of the schools that were there represented, there's 18 people, directors from across the state, really hadn't got in and specified what their libraries are supposed to mean. And when they had some challenges in Walla Walla, they it wasn't only a board, and I agree, we need librarians and other people to fit into this decision of how do we look at our libraries, and how do we want to back up our policy on libraries, because it helped them when they got into trouble on all these books. And that's one issue. I mean, there's other issues with libraries, but when you're prepared, and we've gone through a book ban, that maybe we weren't prepared at the particular time to take that on. And they talked about all the meetings they had in the community regarding where they were going to be, where they were going to fall upon this, how they were going to support their staff, and how they were going to support their superintendent with all this. And it got to be pretty informational on all this. So to just do and dive in and do a policy, we need, because again, our policies were so outdated from 2002 when we faced this book ban, that in my estimation, and this is my opinion, which I still have a right to, and I'm joking too, but that we have to, understand where our people are and where we are now, and see if our community wants to back that up. And we have to be listening to our students who have very, very different viewpoints on things, and they really, they had a panel of youth, and they listened to their youth a lot, and they came up with ideas that made a lot of this not so controversial with all the adults in the room. That how can we serve our students and get to a better format of where we're going with this. But when we went through this controversy so much, we had a curriculum committee that was really, in my estimation again, designed for stuff that you had to read and was part of your curriculum, and yet we had some free reading that we had to make a decision about. And it was very, very hard for me to make the decision to go against our staff and the people on that board that were already there and in place that had to make a judgment on this. And they, quite frankly, said that they didn't think it should be, it's a matter of record, that it should be in a middle school program, that it should be in high school. And again, it was very hard for me to look at that and go against that because I value them, I value their opinions. But we need to, in my opinion, have a whole separate committee that looks at materials and what way we want to go as a district on all this. We can't do it, I mean, I think free reading and these type of issues and what we want to do with our library is a total different issue than what we're going to do with curriculum. And again, the librarian there, she was part of the panelists that spoke with the kids, brought up whether we used it or not, that libraries are technically, even school libraries are part of libraries overall in our RCWs, or our state laws on that. And freedom of speech and freedom of, kids have the right to be choosing books and stuff. And yet we still have a restriction that our parents can have a say in what our kids are taking off the shelves. But this is an issue that's very controversial. Our society has changed a lot, and we need to have community input, staff input, and everybody on this. I think this is maybe one of the most important things that we'll come to. Because have we had conversations about, how are we gonna deal with our libraries going forward? Now that there's so many digital things available and all this, I don't think I've ever been to a town hall or a board meeting that's gone into all that in detail. So the importance of it is, well, one, legally, we better know where we stand on this, and we better know where our community stands on it, and we better know if our community is gonna support this, because we need them to support our levies, our bonds, and everything we're doing. It's public education. But we also need to serve our students and staff on this too. So this is an extremely important policy to get this stuff right.
Yes, and I guess my question was less, not because the how is incredibly important, right? So much is in the details. And so agree with you that we need to have that discussion of the how. But as we said, our base level, our policy, what I'm trying to figure out is, again, what is the question that we're trying to answer?
Well, I think as a governing body, you're gonna make the decisions on some of this, of what the library means. And just as President Hamada just said, you're talking about if you're expanding it to, there's no censorship whatsoever. You have to be aware that that means no censorship. And so the board is gonna set kind of that tone. Does that mean we allow books about the Holocaust, but we also allow books that refute the Holocaust? So that type of thing, I think, is where the board has to come down as a governing body to make some of those decisions as far as that. And then as far as the book challenges and that type of thing, Mr. Hayes, did you want to talk at all about that? I know we talked about, a little bit about, which area that would live in. I'm sorry, did I?
No,
put
he
you
does
on
not.
the
He does not want to talk about this. No, he doesn't.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I think what the bottom line comes down in all of this is it's hard to write procedures for this policy unless we know what the overall philosophy of this existing board is right now. It doesn't mean that 10 years from now there might be all different people sitting that will revise this policy and have a whole different viewpoint of what a school library is. But defining that will help then the staff start to work on what are appropriate procedures, including what would happen if somebody challenged material that was in the library. And then we can fall back on the procedure we would use to do that is based on the philosophy that you have set as a board.
So is there, I guess then, is there disagreement in what the current policy is?
I think that's what the board needs to discuss. Are we on board with how it's written?
I mean, I have a question about, why does it have to be library information and technology program? Why can't it just be library? Like you mentioned, there's a technology committee that is embedded with the library.
In purchasing the technology for the schools, and we have digital coaches that work with the librarians.
If I may, that, and I see Dr. Corby come on up. That conversation was had years ago about, it's an integration, a piece of librarians today actually have those skills.
Okay.
And those are things that they wanna do.
Okay.
So standards pieces I've been there for a while. Before I turn it over to Dr. Corby, I also wanted to go back to just the simple part of it, to simply just go into, so what's the problem, is going at it not in a proactive way. It is, so what do we currently see libraries at? And that's a good question, Director Shara. That's important. If you ask librarians and teachers, the kinds of supports that right now their students get in the library are around the technology area and both, right?
Right.
And so, back to this, I would like us, after you hear from Dr. Corbley, let's go back to that PowerPoint that we got. What are all those pieces that is there something there that we don't agree on? Is there something not there that the board also would like to have in there, that's what libraries are? I think that's what I'd like to see us go back to, but Dr. Corbley.
So I think it's important to remember that libraries, whether they're in our school district or they're in our community, have radically changed, and technology is a core component of that. And how we access information, right, is a lot of that is digital. Right. We don't have encyclopedias in our buildings anymore because we have Google and other search engines that some of which we purchase, particularly in a school district, but even in a public library, there are search engines that are for various types of searches. And so the technology portion is part of an integration of what libraries have become in general, and that's a critical component of their job. And they are provided extra time where they aren't teaching classes to do some of that with staff and in the classrooms. It's part of the structure of how we're moving forward in supporting our instruction and our students in their learning in that particular component of things. I think one thing to think about after our past experience is, right, there's a difference between policy and procedure. And as Randy said, it's very difficult to write procedure if we don't know what the board's philosophy and policy actually is, so that we can move forward with what are our procedures and get those tightened up around selection, around if there is a challenge to a book, what does that look like, and what's the criteria by which we look at those challenges and those types of things. And so hopefully maybe that clarifies a little bit about the question,
but I also think that it's bigger than just the board. I think somehow or other we got to hear from our public a little bit about it. It's just my opinion.
I also feel like there's stuff missing, and we can get to that in a little bit.
There
but
is.
I didn't see anything in here about that we believe in, full-time certificated librarians in the schools. Cause I know Federal Way doesn't do that, they only do like a 0.2, and they have someone else run the library. And I'm against that, and so like things like that aren't in this document as well. Neither are things like partnerships, like we work with KCLS for them to have access to databases and other digital tools, and so that's not in here. I feel like there's some stuff missing. Maybe that comes from us looking at what we believe libraries do, but I feel like we also need to be very clear, like we want these certificated, trained librarians that are full-time in the library, full-time supporting students. So like, I feel like there's other philosophical things besides just what libraries do that are missing from this.
So if I may, and I apologize for interjecting, but I think the things that President Hamada just spoke to and Vice President Beno spoke to are part of shaping a belief system about what Kent School District Board of Directors feels a library does and what a library should do. So you've talked about the type of staffing. That is part of a belief about the structure of a library. And so if the board were to reach consensus on some of these things, you are starting to shape a philosophy and a belief system about what a library in Kent School District should do and should be. And so, those are components of that. So I think you're on a path, and you're right, it could include more. By this being a discretionary policy, there is quite a bit of leeway and room for the board to create and extend what they believe this should be.
Great.
So I'll make some notes in here, Director Beno, to your point.
I could just put it in the document if that's
Okay,
easier. So
that'd be,
do that.
whatever you'd like to do, if that's easier for you.
Yep.
So if I might, on looking at our time, that, I mentioned earlier, it would be great to take that original PowerPoint, if you pop it back up, Ms. Holly, to really dive into that deeper. What in it do you agree with? What isn't in it? So that when we do come back and continue our conversation, that we begin really to put those in writing so that we can see that. What we saw here was what, if you look at a lot of those, many of our librarians would say absolutely. In fact, I've gone and become certified in certain areas that now I can do many of those pieces around instructional technology, as an example. However, there may be other things that are missing, so I would suggest that the board consider looking at this, adding to it, writing comments to potentially, and then us coming back when we do continue. This was our first reading, correct?
Yes.
And so we knew that would be, and I want to kind of set our work moving forward so that when we do come back together, we have already looked at some of those and added some suggestions to that.
How do we bring in, though, the community's input to that, or do you feel that's not necessary?
The board could do that in a number of ways. However, the board needs to also know where they are. So I think as we move forward, it might be something that you consider, how you do that. But I really believe the board needs to also look at what we have currently. And so there's a lot of ways we can do that.
I see why President Hamada is saying this because of what we just went through. And that's why she's feeling that we need to hear from. But the question I have is, if we do this for this policy, are we gonna do that for other policies that are essential policies?
Well, essential, you're guided by either law or funding, so you almost have to stick with that this is discretionary, where the board can make those changes that they'd like to see made. And Director Beno, I believe I read somewhere about when you talked about the certification, the qualifications for teacher librarian, there's RCW around that they have to follow certain criteria, or be certain qualifications, have certain qualifications.
Full-time, I would want them full-time. And
Yeah.
the other thing, I just lost my thought, come on.
No, but it is one of the things I wanted to, go over, because, for example, we just talked about nutrition and physical, right? So, if we're gonna say, we're not gonna have, or we're gonna have community input, what if we have to hear from principals on that policy? We have to hear from teachers on that policy before we make a decision on the final say of that policy. It's essential, but then we're governed by the laws and the, WSDA, nutrition. Do we wanna hear from communities that, that's why I'm just trying to get that idea of, if we're gonna do that for one policy, are we gonna do that for every
I
policy?
feel like the public can comment and
Right.
email us anytime. They can talk at any meeting and provide input. So I don't feel like we need to open it. I just feel like if it's on our agenda, the public can comment on it. And I think that's great.
As you can see, I mean, this doesn't happen, right? It really doesn't happen without actively going and asking the community input. It doesn't happen because, as you can see, this is an open meeting, but we don't have community here. So it happens a lot, and I don't blame the community for that because they're busy. They have a lot of things to do.
Well, it's also our job. Like, that's why we're elected.
That's why we're
Yeah.
elected officials, yeah. So we have to go.
And that's why I shared earlier, Director Fair, is that the board do the deep dive into a lot of the WACs that, the changes that have happened in the library over the last decade or two. And then where we're going in the future. What are some things that we're seeing, so that together you can back to the list that, and, Sally, I'm gonna ask you to kind of summarize where we are and where you would
Right.
like to have the board go, as we come back to our next session.
And we will bring this back to the next policy work session. The ones that are moving forward, so we finished 6700, we finished 1815, we finished 1825, and those will go up for vote on October 26th at the regular meeting. Again, it's whether the vote passes or not. If it goes through, if not, it goes back to a work session again. And then this last policy on libraries 2021 will go to the next work session, and it'll roll over to November 2nd at 5 o'clock. Now, that work session may only be 1 hour. Maybe that's all we'll need on this. There's another pending meeting that may be going on then. So I'll note your changes, Director Benno, and bring it back for the next reading at the November 2nd work session, policy work session. The second, or first hour, probably second hour is my guess.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Holly, for all the work you're doing on this and keeping me on track.
Thank you, Board.
Thank you.
And it is 7:02, and we are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.